What's good, y'all? Anderson Emerald here to talk about a few different rule changes, also a new quote-unquote schedule situation, also a rule that's no longer being implemented as it comes and relates to 2026 and moving forward. Now, let's start off with the 400 meters at the 2026 World Indoor Championships. It's going to be held in Poland in 2026, coming off Nanjing in 2025, also Glasgow in 2024. But the specific update is that the 400 meters for both the men and the women at the World Indoors is going to be run in two separate sections, and the three medalists, gold, silver, and bronze, will be determined by the three fastest times across those two different sections. Now, this is going to be very, very different for the global stage. We've seen this at the NCAA for, I don't know, probably ever, for a very, very long time. But usually at World Indoors, you'll see only 6 athletes qualify into the final, and they'll run one single final race, with everyone from lanes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the top 3, that's who makes it onto the podium. But now we're going to see 8 athletes qualify into the final, and lanes 3 through 6 in each of the heats will be used. So 2 heats of 4 athletes, lanes 3, 4, 5, and 6 in each heat. So I think there's some good and there's some bad, in my personal opinion. The good is that this actually addresses one of the major issues with indoor sprinting, where if you're in an inside lane, specifically 1, 2, arguably to a degree 3, but 1 and 2, you really don't have much of a chance to really be competitive, even if you are one of the best athletes in the world, right? So in 2004, the IAAF at the time, of course, World Athletics, they actually got rid of the indoor 200 at the World Indoor Championships, again, after 2004, because they determined that athletes who ran in lanes 1 and 2 simply just could not be competitive. And really even 3, couldn't be competitive. 5 and 6 had such a massive advantage that, the medal winners were basically decided by their lane draw. So they got rid of the 200. But to a degree, this still exists in the 400, because in the 400, the athletes are running in lanes for, the first part of the race, and then they cut in just before, the 200 meter mark, right? They run about 150 in lanes. So if you are in an outside lane, you have more of an advantage to get to that break first, which will then allow you to be up close, if not leading the pack at the 200 meter mark, the final lap. And then that just gives you simply a massive advantage. If you're in lane 1 and you don't get close to the break, or if you're not in that middle of the pack, you're going to be either boxed in or you're going to be so far behind, it's harder to kind of pass people on the outside. So it is a good thing that they got rid of athletes competing in lane 1 and 2 to make it more fair overall. I remember 2014, I think World Indoors was in Sopat, which I don't even know what country I just know it was Sopat, I think. But Shauna Miller-Weibo, she was running out of lane 1 in the final at World Indoor Champs, and she ended up getting the bronze medal, but it's very likely she would have been more competitive if she was on an outside lane. So, that's an example. Now, the bad here is this is just breaking up the competition aspect of track and field when we do this. Again, I understand that it's been done in the NCAA, for decades, but I think at the world level, it's a little bit different. So, for example, the medalists will be split or could be split between the two heats based on the fastest time. So maybe you'll see the gold medal winner from heat 1, and then in heat 2, you'll see the silver and bronze medalists, right? Or maybe in heat 1, you get the gold medal winner and the bronze medal winner, but then in heat 2, you get the silver medal winner. So it kind of just isn't as great of a viewing experience. It's more just a focus on time and less on that competition aspect, which for the World Championships indoors, I don't think is great, because you're looking at a 1, 2, 3. Obviously, the winner is going to be the highest priority, but when you're looking at an entire podium, potentially splitting up between the heats is not going to be as great. When we have this in the NCAA, yes, you have, winners from heat 1 or winners from heat 2 of the finals, but NCAA really heavily focuses in on the winner, as opposed to, he got second, third place, right? They don't really have like a silver, bronze medalist. You have the winner, and then you have 8 All-Americans across the board. So World Indoor Championships, we just saw, the United States with Chris Bailey, with Jacory Patterson, with Brian Faust. They swept the podium, but they all ran together, went 1, 2, 3 in that same final. if it was split up in 2 heats, that wouldn't be as, I don't know, I think the outcome would be a little bit different in terms of like how people receive, okay, these guys went 1, 2, 3, or whatever athletes, got gold, silver, and bronze. I don't know. That's one thing that I do think is a little downside as it relates to this. So, positives, negatives, it is what it is, but that's going to be a new change going into 2026. Now, relays. Starting next year, from my understanding, athletes and countries really are not able to switch out all different athletes between the heats and the finals of any given relay. And this goes for the 4x1, the 4x4, both, men's, women's. So across the board, you can only trade up to 2 athletes between the heats and the finals in any given relay. And this has been a pretty notable, I don't know if it's super notable. This really does affect the United States because since 2019, you've seen the United States using this tactic to essentially get as many medals as possible for athletes across the board because the United States has so much depth where you will see them run one team in the heats and then a completely different team in the final just so that you can now get 8 medals hypothetically. And we've seen this at the Olympic Games last year. We saw this at the World Championships this year where the United States will have 8 different athletes or 7 different athletes on the podium, receiving their medals. Obviously, it's great. They have the depth, they have the opportunity to do it, but I feel like it's become a little overused to a degree. Again, I think the United States is the main culprit of it. Other countries have done many switches, but no countries have the depth like the United States. And maybe the World Athletics has seen it as like, all right, this is going a little bit too far and taking away from the idea of a cohesive relay coming together to actually beat out the other countries as opposed to, all right, let's just like find the top athletes, put them together and, do what you want to do. Maybe I'm just speculating on that. Now, there was a little bit of backlash. I don't know. I know certain athletes who were maybe a little disappointed with this change. Even, like fans and stuff were maybe slightly disappointed. But put this in perspective. This rule has only existed since about 2019. So for the majority of history, and someone could fact check me on this, for most of history, you have only been able to switch out 2 athletes from the heats into the finals of any relay. But in 2019, they modified the rules, they being IAAF, World Athletics now, right? They modified the rule to allow for as many, alternates, essentially 4 between the heats and the final. And that's what you saw from the United States. I'm remembering the women where they just completely changed the entire team. That was a time when we saw Sydney, Delilah, Phyllis Francis, Wadlin Jonathas, they ran the 4x4 final at the World Championships in Doha. But in the heats, you saw like Kendall Ellis, you saw, who am I thinking? Allison Felix was there. Jessica Beard might have been there. I'm trying to think of like the different athletes they had, but it was a completely different team from the heats into the final. And that continued on Tokyo 2020, Eugene 22, Budapest 23, Paris 24, and then Tokyo 2025. We've seen it happen so much, but now can't do that. You can only alternate 2 athletes between the heats and the finals. That means that 2 athletes who run in the heats, they're going to have to run it in the final, and the teams are going to have to be strategic. I think, in my opinion, I do like that. I have to maybe look. I probably should have looked at like the schedule. I do like it because, again, it provides a little more cohesion, especially when we're talking about the 4x1s. That's a whole different thing. But I can understand if the schedule isn't as favorable because you'll see certain things happen where it's like, they've done it at the Olympics where it's like the 400 will literally overlap with the 4x4 heats. They've done that for the women in 2021 in Tokyo and 2024 in Paris. It was ridiculous. Doesn't happen in Los Angeles 2028, but at the World Championships, if you see things like the 400 final happening the day before the 4x4, right? Or the 400 hurdles or the 800 or whatever, right? Where you may have certain athletes who are capable of performing in some of these relays. If that actually occurs a day or even like a day before or the day of a heat on the 4x4, that may complicate things, right? Or the 4x1, right? That may complicate things. So I don't know, but just something to think about that the United States is no longer, and I say the United States because they are the, prominent country that does do it because they have the depth of talent to be able to make so many alternates. But now going forward, just like it was prior to 2019, each country is only able to make 2 alternates between the heats and the finals in any relay on the track at the World Championships or the Olympic Games. Now, 2 other things I did want to take a look at was very quickly just the long jump rule. This new long jump rule where they were trying to use a takeoff zone and, athletes were really mad. That's scrapped. The World Athletics is no longer going to be, trying to implement it. It's done. So World Athletics, they wanted to try and create a takeoff zone specifically for the long jump. And this was to potentially address the number of fouls that were occurring. So because they saw that many athletes kept fouling, at various different competitions over the years, they felt that it was because, trying to get too close to the board was too challenging. So they said, let's create a zone so we can reduce the amount of fouls and provide more entertainment so that athletes can get, legal jumps. But when that news came out, which I think was in February or March of 2024, athletes were like, nah, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. Famously, Miltiades Tentoglu, check it out on the Citius Mag YouTube channel while I was in Glasgow at World Indoors last year. He kind of went off on World Athletics because it was like the dumbest thing. I mean, he went in. And to his point, and even athletes like Carl Lewis and, all kinds of other long jumpers, they were like, yo, this makes no sense because the specific aspect of the long jump that is really highlights the skill is the precision, the accuracy, being able to hit the takeoff board, right? Being very accurate and then being able to jump off that. That's like the skill that goes into the long jump. If you take that aspect away, then you're completely changing the event and taking away what really makes the long jump a very skilled event, right? So they were really just like, nah, it's ridiculous. So, long jump rule, it's scrapped. World Athletics, I mean, shout out. They kind of were saying that like, we fixed, we found an issue and we addressed the issue, but, we're just not going to go to war with athletes. We're not going to fight the athletes, so we'll scrap it. It's like they were really, really invested in this, it seems like, but they were just like, whatever. It's weird because if the athletes who are competing, and they even did a test event of this, I think at sometime indoors, I think in Germany this year, and I think Larissa Iapicino, Malaki Mihambo, they actually might have competed, but I don't know. The athletes just didn't like it. So it's a little strange for World Athletics to say like, no, you should like this. You should understand that this work. I mean, like, I don't know. So that's just one thing. It's scrapped. We're not going to see it again. It shouldn't have come into play in the first place. Now, last thing is the USATF Tour in 2026. Just wanted to talk about this as this was announced maybe a couple weeks back, and now it's finally the full schedule for the USATF Tour is actually out. They just released it, this week or on Friday. So what this really is just organization of existing track meets in the United States during the outdoor season. This isn't like anything completely brand new or completely groundbreaking, like an actual, like a continental, well, not even like continental tour, or I don't know, something like the Diamond League where you have like points, that are scored throughout the course of the season. It's not like that. It's more akin to a continental tour where it's just a series of meets. And USATF is just taking existing meets and providing different levels of support to create this, I don't know, holistic domestic calendar in the United States. But it's not a true tour in a sense. I guess, again, I was thinking like Diamond League or Golden League or, one of those things where you have a series of meets that are all connected in some capacity. These are just individual meets that have all existed, again, for many, many years, across the board. And, some of the meets that you do see on the calendar are like Penn Relays, Drake Relays, Mount Sac. You have LA Grand Prix. You have, ATX Classic, right? You have Sunset Tour. You have Ed Murphy. You have, the 10. These are all meets that have existed for many of them have existed for years. So it's nothing brand new, but there are some good things that I think kind of come out of this in a sense, at least on the surface, right? It provides opportunities or at least showcases. Again, all these meets have existed in different capacities, but there's essentially an opportunity for all levels and all aspects of the sport to be showcased. So that means sprints, hurdles, distance, throws, and jumps to a degree, right? So you have meets like the Ed Murphy Classic, you have the Miramar Invitational, you have Grand Prix. It says TBD, maybe that's New York City Grand Prix, I don't know, but ATX Classic, right? Those are like sprint and hurdle, and then you'll have jumps at these meets. Then you have a ton of distance meets like the 10, LA Track Fest, Portland Track Fest, you have Sunset Tour. Those are like distance specific meets. Then you got a bunch of meets for the throws, Oklahoma Throws, Tucson Elite Throws, LA Throws Cup, right? Those are going to be some great opportunities for athletes in the throwing events to be able to, throw down, right? And then you have a couple kind of all around kind of big meets, right? Mount Sac, Drake Relays, Penn Relays. So yeah, like all those are big meets. They're going to have everything to a degree. So I think that's good, right? You're showcasing and kind of consolidating these meets into a USATF Tour calendar. 2026 is going to go down. what this does make me realize, though, is the landscape of how each event in track and field is kind of currently showcased, and I guess to a degree, the level of importance in the United States and maybe track and field as a whole. So, for example, at the base level, the jumps really don't get much recognition, spotlight, or opportunities, as you may expect them to relative to other events. They basically are just included as part of many of the sprint meets, but the jumps don't have any individual jump meets. I know that I don't know when, but someone in the comments, please let me know, but a couple years back, and maybe for certain years, there was always a jumps meet at Chula Vista, I think at the Olympic Training Center or something like that, right? There used to be a jumps meet there. I know that there was various different things that occurred at, in Chula Vista where maybe the track presence isn't as prominent there due to like coaching changes, different things, but there used to be a jump specific meet there. Now they don't have it. And then on this new calendar, yes, jumps are included as part of many of the sprint meets, but they're not really, they don't get their own meet. Where on the flip side, the throws do get many of their own meets. As I said, you have things like Tucson Elite Throws, you have, the Ironwood Classic, right? You have all LA's Throws Cup, but they don't get as much recognition and attention as I feel like they are very separated from track and field in general to a degree. So it's kind of this weird aspect of the throws getting their own individual meets, but maybe not getting as much recognition as they probably do deserve, being, one of the core products of track and field, just like the jumps, sprints, distance, right? But then kind of like on the flip side, I think the big contrast to the throws having their own meets is the distance meets. They have their own individual meets. Between the 10, you have, the LA, what do they have? The LA Track Fest, you have the Sunset Tour. Those are individual distance meets, and those I feel are relatively high profile. You look at something like the 10, where it's like, that is a qualifying meet for many athletes. They're trying to get a qualifying time or standard or whatever. And that is really prominently hyped up, at least on my end. And I'm not like the distance guy in any capacity, but I'm like pretty aware of all the different things that go into, the 10. Even many of the meets that Sound Running puts on, which include like the Sunset Tour and, I think LA Track Festival. These are relatively not super high profile, but as standalone distance meets, they are relatively prominent on the track and field calendar each year. So that I think is a good contrast of how the distance group tends to get a lot more spotlight with their individual meets, whereas the throws, even though they have individual meets, they don't get that much recognition. Obviously, throws are just not as popular, but it's an interesting contrast there. And then at the end, the sprints are always going to get tons of attention, and I think it's mainly at the top level and as part of the big meets, because even certain things like you have the Miramar Invitational, which is pretty much a sprint meet. I do think they run the 800 there. Same thing with the Ed Murphy Classic. That's a sprint meet. They also do run the 800 there, but primarily it's a sprint meet. But very much at the top level is where the attention does go when it comes to sprints. And then as part of like bigger meets, like, Mount Sac, you might see some really high profile sprint events and different things like that. So sprints are really weird, where I don't think individual sprint meets get as much attention as like the distance, the individual distance meets. But I do think that the sprints just tend to be more attractive in general to the public, which lends itself to being like, okay, this is track and field, just like anything else. So I don't know if I kind of like spoke through that. I think like the ATX Classic, which occurred last year, 2025, I think might have been the first time. Someone could let me know. I couldn't find like previous years, but that didn't get as much attention, even though that was a sprint specific meet. So there's some differences there, but I don't know. Interesting to see how the USATF Tour kind of does unfold in 2026. Again, it's a tour. It's just a series of existing meets already on the calendar that are now consolidated, with a few different levels of support by USATF. So we'll see how that does roll out. But just a couple things wanted to talk about over the past couple days that have rolled out in terms of, track news. Let me know what you think. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Truly appreciate y'all. Thanks for watching.